Welcome to Alienating the Audience, a show for the deeper side of science fiction. We don't just marvel at the ray guns and special effects in sci-fi. Oh no! We get into the DNA of science fiction itself. I'm your host, Andrew Heaton, the thinking man's nerd. This week, we're actually going to get into DNA because Dr. Eric Spana is going to come on and explain how genetics work in the worlds of Harry Potter and Star Wars, and even go through how superpower mutations would happen in X-Men. Afterwards, Nick Sperduti and I will discuss our recent trip performing stand-up comedy in the land of Oz. Grab your lightsaber and your wand because we're about to learn us some genetics through speculative fiction. My guest today is Dr. Eric Spana. Dr. Eric Spana is a professor of biology at Duke and is, you told me a minute ago, what you call an indoor biologist. What is an indoor biologist?
Oh, well, this is 100% my designation of the sorting biology types. There's those people that like to go out in the field and do experiments outside and collect animals and, do research things and have to do field work. Outside is gross, hot, sticky, and filled with bugs.
Yeah, you're in North Carolina, too. That's a humid state to be doing field work in.
Yeah. I like indoors where there's air conditioning and microscopes and DNA and things like that. So what that means is I can't identify the tree outside, but I can isolate DNA from it.
Nice. Okay, fantastic. And I know you through a wonderful string of people. I've had on Dr. Aaron McDonald at the beginning of this podcast series, and although the interview is not dropped at the time you and I are speaking, it will drop by the time this comes out. Dr. Mohammed Noor, who's a colleague of yours at Duke, and now you. So I'm thrilled that I've had this string of fun scientists that I get to talk to.
Because we all like hanging out. We're like, we had fun doing this. You should do it too.
I am so jealous because every time I talk to any of you, you bring up either Dragon Con or the Star Trek cruise, which I gather is just a bunch of scientists hanging out.
Dragon Con is not just a bunch of scientists hanging out. It's way more fun than that.
Okay.
And so but what's nice about these certain conventions around the country is they'll have different programming tracks. And so Dragon Con's really good for it. Awesome Con in DC and Rose City and Portland both have something called Future Con where they have scientists come in and talk science because, people love hearing about new science, and bringing science to the masses is kind of a cool thing.
Yeah.
Everybody likes dinosaurs and stars.
Yeah. We're in the era of the nerd. Like when I was,
exactly.
I mentioned this with Erin when I had her on, that when I was like a little kid, I was born in the 80s. Like nerd was still a pejorative term. Like nerd was a bad thing. Like if you heard the term nerd in a film, it was usually like, we've got to work something called the internet. Go grab a nerd. And now nerd is now like, I'm a bread nerd. I really like bread. Like nerd, like everybody nerd has become ascendant. And so scientists, you've got your day of the sun. You guys get to be like the new entertainers in priest class.
Yeah. We're the bards.
So on the note of your corpus and your purview, you did a talk called The Biology of Tatooine. Would this explain why there are mammoths on Tatooine? Have you figured that out?
A little bit.
Okay.
So what I like about these is, you have to take the show as law, right? You have to say, oh well, look, this planet exists. Right? Like in a galaxy far, far away, this planet exists. It's kind of a desert planet, and there are these big, giant woolly banthas on there ridden by sand people, and dang, the heck do those things eat? How do you generate a body mass of that size on dirt?
Yeah. No, that's a good point. You don't see a lot of desert mammoths.
You do not, as a matter of fact. But you end up what I ended up with is, maybe mammoth or elephant isn't the best model to view their biology and ecology of. What if you did it with whales? And you go, because whales eat tiny things. Whales eat the krill that you can barely see, but they eat a lot of it.
Okay.
And so that means you're just going to need to have a lot of small insect-sized things in the dirt or in that sand on Tatooine for them to filter feed through there, eat up to generate body mass. Because if a blue whale can do it, that little bantha doesn't need that much stuff.
Fair enough. Okay, so the bantha is just sort of roaming the desert eating termites?
Yeah. Actually, termites is not a bad size comparison, but yeah, small insects. And then you go, oh, well, that's great. But then, what do the insects eat? Right?
They of course eat midichlorians, which brings me to my next question for you, which is
okay. Wait.
Oh yeah. Go ahead.
One more.
Oh sure.
One more.
Yeah.
So insects would tend to eat, something smaller, but Tatooine also has another problem: is the oxygen we have here is all produced by plants through photosynthesis.
Yeah.
There's just not enough plants on Tatooine to generate an atmosphere for Rey to breathe.
Yeah, the whole thing's Yemen, basically, right? Like it's because every time we see a top-down picture of Tatooine, it's always entirely desert.
It looks a lot like Tunisia.
Yeah. It does look a lot like Tunisia. Well, see, and this is where my armchair economist comes in. I'm like, well, maybe there was some sort of ecological disaster, and they're on borrowed time, and there was a bunch of oxygen into the air, but it's depleting, which they don't talk about, but they should probably worry about. What did you come up with? Algae in the sand. Oh, okay. That's why they're not panicking. Right. Then. So like brown algae. Because most of the oxygen generated on Earth is actually generated by algae in the ocean. Okay. And, we can do that on Tatooine with little gold-colored photosynthetic things that get eaten by the insects, that get eaten by the banthas. And, you sort of generate an entire food web in an ecological sense. And then when the banthas die, they become the spice. And the spice is collected and used in order to travel across the galaxy. It must flow. Well, we're gonna need some spice smugglers. Wait, didn't we? They do. Yeah, they mentioned spice smugglers in the Rise of Skywalker, and I was like, I know that's not a Frank Herbert reference, but it sounds like a Frank Herbert reference. Yeah, loved it. Well, then sticking on Tatooine for a minute, because I know kind of one of the big signal flares that you have is you've done multiple talks on the genetics of Harry Potter. I do not know Harry Potter nearly as well as I know Star Wars. So on the note of Tatooine, can we talk about midichlorians for a minute? Oh, absolutely. Okay. How would they work? What is your interpretation of them? All right. Roll up your sleeves. All right. Yeah. All right. Here we go. All right. So there's a problem in the how Star Wars universe discusses the Force. And so I'm not this is where I get to go, see, I'm actually a college professor. I haven't seen all the Star Wars Expanded Universe stuff because, I got a day job. Right? I get to do that kind of stuff. So, no, I haven't sat through all the Clone Wars. I haven't sat through all the other stuff. And, I read those Thrawn novels when they came out. Okay. That's years ago. Yeah. But here's the problem. For a Force-sensitive kid, he grows up, the little Jedi snatch him out, and he becomes part of the Jedi Order, and he becomes a Jedi, right? Yeah. Right. That's a storyline. What happens to his kids? Oh, he doesn't have any, ever. Right? Jedi were all, celibate or did not produce offspring. They're monkish. We don't get the impression they're knocking boots, or at least they're probably not supposed to. So that actually kind of really screws genetics. So that means, oh, hold on. Wait. If I'm following you here, even if the occasional Jedi is going to a Motel 6 when nobody's looking, overall, if it is genetic, the Force sensitive gene is not getting passed on by the people that wield it the most, right? Right. Oh, yeah. I never thought about that. Right. Okay. And it gets even worse when you think about evolutionarily, because you go, oh, look, these human Jedi, develop a mutation that gives them Force sensitivity. But that means that same mutation to generate that same Force sensitivity had to happen in Yoda and the
little baby Yoda.
Baby Yoda, yeah.
And Darth Maul, whatever species he was, and Ahsoka, and like all those other species. You had to have an exactly the same mutation, though evolutionarily none of them are related.
Right.
Right. And you go, man, that is the stupidest concept ever. So transmission genetics just doesn't work.
But
right?
Because I don't know how well they spell it out. But I'm jumping ahead. Please continue.
However, what works really well is a broad host range virus. Right? Where you go, oh, look, you don't pass the gene from your cells in your germline to your offspring. You pass it the same way you pass on, a cold or HIV or herpes or whatever possible thing you give to your child.
Oh my God! Midichlorians are space herpes.
Midichlorians are space herpes.
Would it be best as a virus? Because midichlorian sounds to me like mitochondria. So I'm thinking like a tiny organelle, like that. In my understanding of genetics, is that the original mitochondria was a separate species that got sucked into an amoeba or something like that, and they became friends, and the union goes on. Could midichlorians be like that? Like there are some cells that are better to live in than others.
Sure. Right, because the way viruses reproduce is they go into a cell, they make new viruses, and then they leave. Sometimes they just stay. Right? That's why you have cells that will just keep producing viruses forever, because those viruses will get stuck in that cell and stay there and produce lots of more midichlorians.
Okay.
And so the real trick then that I get to just absolutely ignore is how does having this infectious agent allow you to break the rules of physics by thinking about it? Like, you can do space magic. That's not my that's outside of my job.
And I got to say, I think is a fatal flaw in the original prequels, or I'm redundant here. In the prequels, I'm fine with having space magic. Like Star Wars. Star Wars is a fantasy epic which takes place in space. They could have called it Rocket Wizards, and it would have made the exact same sense. They could call all of the Jedi wizards. They could call the Force magic. Nothing would have changed up until they tried to explain it. Then I was like, oh no, no, you're not sci-fi. You don't need to be sci-fi. You don't need to worry about that. Okay.
Yeah.
But that
just makes the challenge more difficult, right?
But I like this. So following the logic then, so midichlorians are not. You might have a genome which is predisposed towards hosting midichlorians, in that you might have your midichlorian immune system might not be as good as somebody else's. So really, you want somebody a little bit inbred that doesn't have very good immune system, and which in the Star Wars universe, given that there's only 4 families, that might be the case. That would explain some of the incredible force wielding capacity.
And so I think what it means is at some point in your family history, you had been in contact with someone who was carrying midichlorians.
Yoda just made out with everybody at some point 800 years ago.
So that little kid in the stables in Last Jedi, right, at the very end?
Yeah.
Right? Like, who did he bump into? Or, I guess technically it wasn't him. It was probably his mother prior to his conception, right? So that he would inherit it from her, because, Luke and Leia inherited it, and their interaction with their mother was only essentially during half of that last.
Yeah.
What movie was that? The third, number 3.
Pre-suppressant drugs, you would be expected to pass on HIV to a child prior to the existing array of medicine, right? So it could be something like that, where you've got and if everyone in the galaxy has some variant of midichlorian immunity, this is a fascinating thing. Could you then if it's not a virus, could it be an organelle? Could it be a bacteria?
Sure.
Well, because I'm thinking if that were the case, could you have like a probiotic diet that would encourage the force, or alternately have midichlorian supplements? Have you been watching The Mandalorian?
I've got some midichlorian yogurt here.
Yeah, exactly. Midichlorian yogurt. Have you been watching The Mandalorian?
Yeah.
Like I wonder if that was the thing, was they were going to harvest Baby Yoda to make midichlorian yogurt and then pass that out to all the existing moths so that they'd all have the Force.
I like that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, but when all they really need to do is like pass the baby around.
Rub your head vigorously against Baby Yoda.
And like can you catch it? Can you develop it late? Can you get Force abilities late, or was it always in you and you didn't notice?
Okay.
Right.
Or is it again, like if it's space herpes, maybe you flare up. So maybe you're not a consistent Force user. Maybe sometimes you're like, oh, actually, like right now, I got the Force big.
Maybe
time to shoot out some lightning.
Yeah, maybe your X gene just gets activated, and you turn into.
Well, so then on that note, I gather that the magic wielded in Harry Potter is genetic and not viral.
Yeah.
Okay.
So
walk me through
that one actually works out passing on through family lineages just fine.
Okay.
Right. And so almost all of that can be explained using conventional introductory transmission genetics.
Good job, J.K. Rowling.
Sure. Let's say she thought about that.
Yeah, I assume she was So as a side note, I used to live in Edinburgh, which is where she wrote the Harry Potter series, and I was a tour guide there for a while. And my favorite cafe in Edinburgh for the castle, or just Edinburgh in general, or I did two tours. I did walking history tours of Edinburgh that were Old Town. Okay. So I'd start on the Royal Mile, and it would take about 3 hours. And it worked. So I was a history major, and all of the Scots, as soon as they become tour guides, go to Spain because they want to soak up sun and stop being blue. So I was fantastic. And I also did a ghost tour. But I walked past the castle. I didn't go into the castle. I walked past the castle. But my favorite cafe in Edinburgh is one in Newtown that. There's a sign on the wall that says J.K. Rowling never wrote here, because it's the only cafe in Edinburgh that doesn't claim to be the place that she sat and wrote Harry Potter, which is the mythology of Edinburgh now, is every single cafe is where this poor destitute single mother sat and wrote, while dreamily looking at the castle out a window. But there's a bunch of such locations that claim that.
That's fantastic.
But yeah, props to her for apparently having a passing grade on the genetics. Go ahead, yeah.
Yeah, it did. Like a fair amount of it works out just fine. Like some of it, you have to go, oh, that's not how lay people would think about this, but we have an explanation and we have terminology for this.
So I'll run you through a couple of scenarios, because there's one that does throw me off. So my understanding, I'm not super well versed in Harry Potter or Harry Potter terminology, but I do know a few terms. There's Muggles, who are people like me, presumably most of the listeners. These are people that are not magic sensitive. There's wizards and witches. That you just your preferred gender pronoun there. But my understanding is there's no magical difference between the two.
There's no difference between them.
Great. Okay. So there's Muggles. There's half-bloods, which is if one of your parents is a wizard or witch and the other one's a Muggle. The one that throws me off is squibs, which I've only recently found out about. A squib is both of my parents are wizards, but I am not. How does that work genetically?
All right. Man, you went right to like chapter 5 of the whole how does the genetics thing work.
No, we can totally back up because I assume it's I watched your video, so I'm able. It's fresh out of my mind, but I assume that it is an X chromosome trait since both genders have it. No. Okay. So magic is not chromosomal, or at least it's not on the X chromosome.
It's not on the X chromosome or the Y chromosome. Oh, okay. And so we can tell that from two different half-bloods. One being Seamus Finnegan.
Okay.
And the other being Hagrid.
Okay.
Right, because they both had a different parent who was a wizard and a witch, and they both could do it. Could do magic. Right. So it couldn't be on the X or the Y. So it has to be on one of the other chromosomes, which are called autosomes.
Well, hold on. So I'm going to pause you just to make sure I understand this. My prior reasoning was it's not a Y chromosomal thing, because if that were the case, only male, there would only be wizards, there would be no witches, right? But it's not. So why couldn't it still be an X chromosome where you inherit it from either parent?
Hagrid Hagrid, his father was a full-blood wizard. His mother was a giant.
Okay.
Giants don't have that wizarding gene.
Okay.
Right? And so, but Hagrid inherited wizard magic use. But he didn't inherit an X from his dad. He inherited a Y.
Oh, okay. I'm an idiot here. If you're a male, you only get your X chromosome. I'm sorry. Everybody gets their X chromosomes from mom. Nobody gets any X chromosomes from dad. Y is only contributed from dad. Dad's X chromosomes are not passed on.
Yep.
Okay. All right. That makes sense to me now. Gotcha.
So they're autosomal. So we can tell that, and actually through Hagrid, we can put the designation on a wizarding gene that it is dominant, because you only need one copy of it, because half-bloods only have one copy.
Right. Okay.
So, and if you can see the trait with only one copy of the mutation, we call that a dominant mutation.
Right. Yes. If it were recessive, all the half-bloods would not have it.
Exactly.
Okay.
You would need two copies, and so we go from it's a dominant autosomal mutation. It turns out, I'm just doing a little evidence-y like lead up, so bear with me.
Sure.
So if you're a dominant mutation, usually what happens if you have two copies of that mutation, it is way, way stronger, right? So if you have one copy of a particular mutation, you can develop a trait called achondroplasia, which is a dwarfism mutation.
Okay.
If you have two copies of it, it's embryonic lethal.
Okay.
Right? So, like, that means, Tyrion Lannister has one copy of that mutation, because he can't have two because he's alive.
What was the term used? What was it?
Achondroplasia.
And is that dwarfism
that's
specifically?
Dwarfism.
Okay, gotcha.
That's a specific dwarfism.
Okay, yeah.
It's not the one you see in the Harry Potter universe, but sorry. But if you see the same effect with one or two copies, it's a trait we call complete dominance in genetics, and that's super rare. And
I think I probably have that. I feel pretty self-assured. I suspect my genes are very strong.
Complete dominance.
Yes, exactly. I watched a lot of John Wayne films as a kid. I assumed that activated some epigenetic filter.
So when you work all the way through it, and you work in what other species on Earth can do magic like wizards and witches and Harry Potter, because there's a few. It turns out that magic use wouldn't necessarily be a new, unique trait to humans. It would be a thing that all humans used to be able to do, but is being lost from the population. So, like,
if it's recessive or just in general?
No, just in general.
Okay.
Right, because there's only a very small subset of witches and wizards.
Right.
Most of us are muggles.
Right.
Evolutionarily, there's lots of terminology for how this stuff works, and but the easiest way to think about it is, some of the beings on Earth in the Harry Potter universe that's closest to us are things like Vila and hags and vampires and things like that, because humans can interbreed with them and make viable offspring. So, you can make viable ligers that are still fertile with Vila. Mm-hmm. So that means those things are closely related to us, but they can all do magic, not just a small subset. And when you start doing sort of family tree phylogenetics, which is a term, it turns out that
that's a great way to introduce a term. By the way, that's a term. Just keep going.
Yeah, sorry, we're not going to go into that.
It's like an audio footnote in a
magic
Wikipedia
use
article.
is an ancestral trait that is being lost from the human population. And if you think about it that way, magic use becomes a much easier way to think about it, because it becomes, muggles are just recessive mutants, because they don't have a copy of a functional wizarding gene.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Muggles are just the redheads that have taken over the population. They are just the blondes and blue eyes of Scandinavia that have taken over the population.
Okay.
Where a small subset still, and a small subset still has dark hair in Scotland and Ireland, and a small subset still has brown hair and brown eyes in Scandinavia. Those are essentially the wizards and witches.
Okay, so I'm gonna march through this as I understand it here. So we can infer based on the parentage in Harry Potter that the wizarding gene is a dominant gene and not a recessive gene. Otherwise, there would be no half-blood children that have a wizarding gene. So the mystery that we're left with is, if this is the case, is this either a recent mutation a la X-Men that is expanding outward within the human population, or is it is it declining? And if that's the case, you're not saying that the Muggle gene is itself a mutation. Like the natural state of mankind is not wizards, and that's occluded by a Muggle gene, but rather the Muggle population has just shouldered our way into dominance in the same way that go ahead, yeah. So the way the easier way to think about it, I think, is hair color or eye color, right? Where blue eyes is an easy recessive mutation. You know, it's easily taught in school. If you have 2 copies of this mutation, you have blue eyes. You have one copy, it's going to get brown. You're going to get brown eyes. Wizarding is the brown eye version. Okay.
Right? If you have 2 copies of brown eye, 2 copies of that mutation, you have 2 copies of the normal version, you have brown eyes. If you have 1 copy, you still have brown eyes.
Okay.
If you lose it, you have blue eyes.
Okay.
Blue eyes are the Muggles. Brown eyes are the wizards.
Gotcha. So even though the wizards are the genetically dominant variant, they have been population displaced by the Muggles. Which here
sort of like happens on Earth all the time.
I was about to say, this is where my Scottish history as a former tour guide can swing in. So people talk about redheads in Ireland and Scotland a lot. That is not a Celtic gene. The red-haired genes, insofar as we know, comes from the Germanic peoples, and it came to Scotland and Ireland via the Vikings. So when you think of redheads, think of Eric the Red or Leif Erikson. Don't think of the Celts. The Celts look like Welsh people. So, like, if you're at home and you haven't visited Wales, think of Catherine Zeta-Jones. Think of that coloring of kind of darker British, what we might call, Black Irish. That's sort of the indigenous Celtic population. And even though the darker genes would be the ones that are dominant, the Vikings were so good at coming in and slaughtering and displacing the local populations, and also disseminating their genes that I don't know whether red hair is a dominant gene or a recessive gene, but either
red hair is recessive.
It is, yeah. So either way, the Vikings were just so good at displacing the local population that they didn't have to interbreed as much as outbreed or kill them, and that appears to be the case with Muggles.
About right.
Gotcha. Yeah. Okay. So in the Harry Potter universe, maybe wizards were living in our realm and they were pushed out by the hyper aggressive Muggle population, or something like that.
Well, I think the fun way to think about it is, for these things to happen, there only has to be a very small difference in sort of breeding frequency for a particular mutation to take over in a population. And it's really easy to see how breaking the rules of physics by thinking about it would be bad for you as a species.
Yeah, well, Baby Yoda,
little kids in the crib just like blowing stuff up and accidentally doing magic and dying.
No, this makes sense to go back to the Mandalorian. Baby Yoda force strangles a friendly lady, and if the Mandalorian had stopped it to check him, she would have dropped to the floor as a dead husk. And so I could see that being that would be problematic. It would kind of be like if there was a dominant gene that allowed you to shoot fireworks from your fingers. That would probably produce some negative results, even if the gene itself is dominant.
Yeah, okay. Right. I think that would. If there was a mutation to let you shoot fireworks from your fingers, there would be no boys left in middle school.
Yep. You're right. That end of population.
I mean,
gone.
That's why we're not allowed to have bottle rockets in this country, right?
Yeah, that's a good point. We barely survived as a species without that gene, just based on the fireworks we have at our ready
Cats and
disposal.
firecrackers, man. Oh.
Which and there too. I mean, like, I guess that's worth pointing because we're using terminology like dominant and recessive, which sociologically would indicate I associate with, say, like aggressive or submissive or something like that. But that's not the case with genetics, because you could have a deleterious dominant trait. You could have a trait that is stronger than the other traits, but it's not helpful from an evolutionary perspective.
Right.
Okay.
Right. Because, dwarfism is a dominant trait.
Right. Okay.
It is not at all beneficial.
Okay. Yeah. Wow. Could you? Although actually, so I did another podcast. It'll probably drop before you and our episode comes out. But a friend of mine proposed, if you were going to have a colony ship, how many people would you want to have in the colony ship? And so I did some research on the 5,500 rule of you need 50 people in a viable breeding population to avoid inbreeding. You need 500 to avoid genetic drift. One of the things I learned about that was the term outbreeding, where you could have a scenario where it helps to be a dwarf. Like if we were presumably like really just like going all over the map here, like Homo floresiensis, which is one of the hominid species that we discovered in the last 10 years. Homo floresiensis was a human species that was, as far as we can tell, dwarven, but was living on a tiny island. So that was probably better from a food supply perspective.
Right.
Great. I'm nailing this. I'm feeling much better about my lack of genetic knowledge compared to you, Professor.
So awesome. So now that we're there, we can get Muggle-borns like Hermione.
Okay. Yeah. So there's Muggle-borns and squibs, right? So yeah, how do Muggle-borns happen?
Right. Well, Muggle-borns, their parents are mutant for both copies of that gene.
So they're right. They're both Muggles.
Parents both are Muggles. All you have to do is make a single mutation in that gene in either the sperm or the egg for this to happen in the offspring. Right? These are called de novo mutations, and these happen all the time. So what we tell you, what you learn in school is that you are 50% your mom and 50% your dad.
Uh-huh.
Right? Yeah. Like you inherited this from both.
Right.
And that is true from a certain point of view. Because the answer is actually there's about 100 changes in your genome that aren't in mom or dad.
Yeah.
That is just DNA replication errors that happens. And sometimes, they give you childhood sad pediatric cancers, and sometimes they make you a wizard.
And this would be the so when I had on your colleague Dr. Muhammad Noor on, he told me that I think it's an average of 77 genes that you have mutations from your parents out of like a billion, but still you have 77 mutations.
So it's 77. Yeah, I rounded up to 100.
Yeah. It's fine. I'm going to forget the 77. 100 is a much better working number.
It's actually 77 changes, but out of those, roughly only one is in a gene.
Okay.
Because there's so much extra space in your genome, right?
Sure.
Because there's lots of space in your genome, but only a very 4 or 5% of it is actual genes.
And if I were to, so with this mutant gene here, to go back to the eye example, so because I understand it's easier for me to tabulate eye stuff in my head than Muggle stuff. So if we're going back to eyes, blue eyes are recessive, brown eyes are dominant. So you could have two brown-eyed parents, but if one of them on rare occasion has a mutation, then all of a sudden that brown eye gene is turned off, or they just randomly develop a blue eye gene? Is it something like that?
So for the eye color, the functional copy of the gene does some things that ends up producing melanin, right? Brown pigment, right? So a functional gene gets you brown pigment. The non-functional gene doesn't. So you end up with less pigment eyes. You get blue.
So you sort of have like an albino gene that kicks in to some extent?
It is actually.
Okay.
But the eye color mutations in that gene are only affecting the eyes.
Gotcha. Okay.
Right. And so that gene is turned on in lots and lots of places: hair, eyes, every place you need melanin. But but there are certain regions of it that are responsible for turning the gene on in eyes or hair or other regions. And so it's a good example of not every mutation completely inactivates the gene. Some of them are only partially deactivating. And so eye color one is. And so Hermione is essentially, you have two blue-eyed parents. A mutation happens in that small, minuscule potential chance, and they develop a brown-eyed child.
So my immediate take on this is to ask if Mrs. Hermione's milkman is a wizard. That is where my mind immediately goes up.
That is exactly the answer. And when I give this talk, to sort of an adults, we use the phrase.
There's a couple of really uncomfortable ones in the audience.
We are not going to invoke not the dad.
Gotcha. Okay.
Right? Because there's lots of places where you can go, oh, really? Is it a 1 in a billion chance, or is he not the dad? And the answer in the world, of course, is he's not the dad.
Yeah.
But, you have to take Hermione's parents and go, it was a 1 in a billion chance.
Does that actually happen with eyes, though? Like, can you have two blue-eyed parents produce a brown-eyed child? Like on a rare occasion?
Yes. It's not as clean as that, because there's lots of other ways to do it. And like, if you get actual genetic nerds together, they'll be like, oh, that's just too simplifying it. I mean,
I think the takeaway is if you're a milkman, wear contact lenses. That's the answer to this. Is throw people off. Always have blue eyes.
23andMe is going to get you, babe.
Yeah.
Yep. And so, she can inherit this new thing, because these changes do happen and they're very infrequent, right? Which is why there's only like one Muggle born a year in all of the UK. And so the percentages there are just Powerball odds.
Okay.
And so it's not a super common event. In fact, it's a super rare event.
Wait, one Muggle. Do you mean one wizard born within the Muggle population?
No, yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Right.
Hermione was the only wizard born to Muggle parents in 1979.
Okay. All right. Apparently she's older than me. Interesting to know. Didn't realize that.
Right.
Okay. So there's a rarity there. Then, but there's an inverse of this too, isn't there? And that's the squibs, which is where the two wizards produce a liger.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, no, it's the two wizards produce nothing. It's like, well, the two brown-eyed parents who have two good copies gave rise to the blue-eyed kid. How could this be? We had, there was no other options.
And we're not invoking the milkman, so we have to go. We have to go with the genetic explanation. Okay.
Right. And for the squibs, we actually use. I invoked a different version of it, which is a genetic term called a second site suppressor.
Okay.
Which is, we can invoke another gene. Right? And what this other gene would do is, if you mutate it, it would actually turn off the wizarding gene. So the same 1 in a billion chance you got Hermione gives you a 1 in a billion chance in this new gene we're going to call squib.
Uh-huh.
But what squib does is, this new mutant version is, it turns off that wizarding gene. So now this mutation turns off your two good copies, and you don't have any wizarding ability because your gene's not activated and turned on. It's just sitting there useless.
Oh, that sucks. That would, if both your parents are wizards and you're not, I would assume that that's a really awkward scenario to grow up in.
Yes. What really happens to these poor folks is
they become like
they are the way I usually describe it is, they are ostracized from society, shunned, and kicked out.
Oh.
And these poor squib folks end up living sad, awful lives and marry muggles because wizards won't have them.
Okay.
Now, and then what makes this fun then is you have, if you've got a squib dad and a muggle mom, right?
Uh-huh.
Dad still has 2 copies of the wizarding gene. He has to pass on 1. He only has 1 copy of that squib gene, that squib mutation. He's got a 50-50 shot of passing that on.
Okay.
So that squib who marries the muggle has a 50-50 chance of having a half-blood child.
Thus making his family Christmas dinner that much more awkward when Grandma and Grandpa are talking to the granddaughter about her wizarding prospects, and he's sitting there with his arms folded.
Generation thing.
Goes and watches The Death of a Salesman by himself for the 50th time. Poor guy. I feel bad for the Squibs character.
You're like, well, they kicked me out, but at least my kid gets to go back to Hogwarts.
Yeah.
Right? And what was fun about this was that this was actually it actually worked in one of the family trees in the Harry Potter universe.
Okay.
Right. And so it worked. And that was
again, hats off to J.K. Rowling.
It was I can't believe this actually works out, but this is a fun thing. Had a good time.
So we've thus far we've had midichlorians or some kind of virus. We've got Harry Potter. It's a genetic trait that's passed on, or forgive me because I don't know the term super well, but I think a genetic trait's a good way to say this.
Yeah, that's a good way to say it. Yeah,
okay. Yeah. X-Men, same phenomenon, is because X-Men, they're called mutants. So I assume that it is some kind of mutation, like somebody sat on a microwave too long, or like Chernobyl happened in West, like somewhere, and a bunch of people got radioactive bits in them, and then they started.
So there's so much problems I have with X-Men. I want to take it if I had the ability to take a sabbatical semester where I don't have to do anything, I would just sit and read X-Men comics to come up with the grand unifying theory of how this works.
You know, if I ever get a chance to talk to high profile Duke donors, I am 100% gonna root for you. I'll be like, you know what you guys should do is create create a new chair for Dr. Spana that he could just go read X-Men comics. Take half the year off to stock up on sci-fi, half the year to blow it out academically. Yes. I would love that.
Because here's the problem with X-Men.
Okay.
It's okay. So you inherit this X mutation at birth, right? And I'm not really very good with X-Men because all of my who's related to who is very sketchy, and I'm not convinced I actually know the lineages properly.
Okay.
Right. Is Nightcrawler Mystique's child?
I don't know. I didn't read the comics. Okay, I did watch the cartoons, and I saw all the films except Logan. But I've quit watching them now that they're doing this weird split-off version where Professor X is an alcoholic character. I don't know what's going on.
So Magneto was the father of Scarlet Witch and Quicksilver.
Okay.
That's the only one I'm really quite sure of, because they had to skip that in the Marvel universe, but they could do that in the Fox one.
Okay.
And so here's the problem with that. So little Magneto doesn't really have any powers, and then at puberty, or roughly when this becomes activated, he develops superpowers, right? So his superpower ability is unique to him. It's not passed off to his offspring. The ability to have a superpower is passed off to his offspring. Right? But not the power itself.
Yeah.
Right? So
there's a very open-ended mutant gene. You're a mutant, right, but there's no specificity to it.
Yeah. So molecularly, this is a really huge problem for me. Right, because you're okay, how does this get activated at a certain time? Okay, well, we can do hormones and things like that. That's how we activate it.
Okay.
How do we activate it in the entire body at once in exactly the right way? And how is that not in his germ line that he passes off to his children? Right? It's the difference between somatic cells, which is you, and germline cells, which is the ones you pass off to your children.
Okay.
Right? So the arm cells from Magneto are different from the sperm of Magneto.
Okay.
Right? Okay, that's really hard to do in human embryology.
This would be something like if, well, I guess the eye example is probably not the best thing, but if I've got, I don't know, I've got genes that make me very, very tall, and I've got like really good calf muscles or something, but they're just completely absent when I'm reproducing. Because
you start as a one cell stage, right? You start as one single cell. Yeah, I did too. Actually,
nice.
I think about it. Yeah. I remember it vividly. But somewhere in when your mutation your X mutation has to be make you different than your parent, has to happen somewhere in the embryonic development before you make stem cells or make germ cells, right? So before you start making the precursors for the eggs and sperm, you have to set those aside and make sure they're safe. And then you can do your weird mutation on all the rest of the cells. And then you don't express any of those changes until puberty. So it's not like Mystique was a tiny little blue baby. She was blue at a certain age.
Okay.
Or maybe she was. I don't know.
So we're relying on my complete and utter lack of genetic knowledge, but my substantial amount of science fiction tropes. Could you have a solar storm that increases the amount of radiation coming through the atmosphere? Because that would increase mutation, wouldn't it? Just in general?
You're gonna get lots of mutations.
Yeah, or like if Chernobyl blows up, like there's going to be some amount of mutations downwind of that?
Your cosmic rays, your gamma rays, all those rays are going to break DNA.
Yeah.
It does damage to DNA. It does damage mostly to somatic tissue because it's what you're hitting, and because the target for germline is very small. And so we have to be able to those Fantastic Fours that get hit by all those, right? Because Fantastic Four was actually a genetic mutation too, wasn't it?
So, yeah, it was cosmic rays because I don't remember the exact timeline of when that
cosmic rays, right?
Was written, but
they all had something
it was before
different
the moon landing.
It was. It's right.
Well, yeah, because they're going up in the rocket, and the writer's like, "Oh man, well they would be bombarded by cosmic rays, which of course makes your arms stretchy. Or if you're a woman, you go invisible. Everybody knows that.
You become invisible, or you grow rock skin.
Yeah.
So all of these have really different, complicated how to have a mutation yourself and not pass it on. And they also have the added problem of how to get a mutation yourself and have it be the same mutation throughout your entire body as an adult.
Well, it seems to me the big one. I could be wrong on this, but I feel like most mutations are probably not going to be helpful. They're just random, right? So you might.
They're not. They're 100% deleterious.
Right. Somewhat rare that you're going to have suddenly I've got an extra calf muscle that allows for me, and it might not be, it might be that you've got something that combined with other mutations down the line might result in that extra calf muscle, but for right now you just have this weird extra tinge thing, right? So within the X-Men universe and within Fantastic Four, the conceit going on in the background is that mutations don't just result in genetic screw-ups where people, fall apart into pieces or anything like that. Rather, that it always has some sort of productive end happening as a result.
Yeah, they use that a lot, and I think you do actually Muhammad would do this really well with the math of a beneficial mutation. They're super absurdly super rare, and that beneficial thing is minute.
Yeah.
Right? It's almost all of them are very deleterious, and the ones that aren't might help you 0.00001% in some other thing. Right? I guess the best example of a beneficial mutation is lactose tolerance.
Okay.
Right? Because we're not built to drink milk after you're weaned, right? You're not supposed to keep expressing the lactase gene to metabolize milk. You're a toddler. What would you need milk for? And that mutation gave a substantial, that single mutation gave a substantial increase to fitness for humans. because now you can drink that milk stuff that comes out of everything else.
And if you're living in a Nordic climate and it's getting pretty cold out, but you do have a cow, you're able to tap that cow for protein in a way that you couldn't do if you were living in sub-Saharan Africa and didn't have that mutation.
Yeah, and you just take that and you go, oh, the X-Men stuff and the Fantastic Four stuff, like, and the thing that they get the most wrong that really kind of bugs me is, if you go to the doctor's office and you get X-rayed, you go up in space, you get cosmic rayed, those are going to generate mutations in your DNA, right? At worst, you're going outside, you're getting ultraviolet light, hits your skin. It's not giving you superpowers. It's giving you melanomas.
Yeah.
Right.
Again, mostly deleterious. It's just your DNA fraying.
It's deleterious, but it's also deleterious effects in that region, and it's not uniform. Right? You're not getting a melanoma over all the cells of your body,
right? But
in a subset, because those mutations are random in every cell.
Gotcha. So if you're having a mutation post birth, like it is going to be a localized mutation and not one. Your whole genome does not change at some point because you stand downwind of Chernobyl. Hence why in that series they've got like lead cod pieces on to protect their sperm from getting fried. Right.
And so essentially, once you start doing this, the phrase we use is mosaic, right? Because you are different in all the parts.
I'm sorry, I didn't catch the phrase you use is mosaic?
Mosaic, right? Because you are not uniform all the way around.
Okay.
Right? And, if you start, if you're the X-Men, or if you're a Fantastic Four and you get cosmic rayed, you have there's no reason why you should be able to catch fire on your left hand and your right hand.
See, what I'm thinking would be like a sad but funny X-Men sketch would be you're at Xavier School for Gifted Youngsters. And they're like, "What's your power?" "Well, I can shoot fire out of my if I have a playing card, I can shoot fire." "How about you?" "I can teleport." "How about you?" "I can metabolize milk as an adult." That's my mutation. Yeah. "Oh, cool, Peter. You can eat cheese." "Yeah, I can eat cheese, and I can drink a lot of milk." "Okay. Well, I guess technically you're a mutant. You're allowed to be here, but
cheese milk. Yeah. Well done. Yeah. And I've been able to do it my entire life. I didn't have to have, I didn't have to wait till puberty. So apparently X-23 is Logan's child. I'm going to spoil stuff for you. Okay. Sorry. It's been long enough.
You know what? I do this on the podcast regularly. I spoil stuff for everybody listening, and it's been like a decade. I've had time.
Right. And so X-23 is Logan's child. But she has the exact same powers that he does. And you go, but that's not how X-Men genetics works.
Yeah.
And then they work out that she's not his biological child. She's a product of cloning parts of him.
Okay.
And so bear with me on this. And so Muhammad and I teach this spring break class on science and science fiction and biology, right? And we took this class of 18-year-olds to go see Logan.
I am sending my kids to Duke. This sounds great. Continue.
And we came out of there going, wait. This breaks the rules of X-Men.
Yeah.
How can this be? And what they worked out was, well, first off, she can't be his clone. She's a she.
Right.
Okay. And she had a mom.
Uh-huh.
Okay. And what it worked out was, you can take somatic tissue, like literally arm tissue, and you can put that in cell culture, and through a few interesting tricks, you can de-differentiate those skin cells into stem cells, like skin stem cells. And then with a few extra tricks, you can start de-differentiating them back into earlier and earlier precursor cells. And they found a paper for some group that actually got them down to sort of very primordial level, and then could differentiate them as almost to sperm. Like this paper could take somatic tissue and get it to like de-differentiate and then differentiate into meiosis. Which you go like, well, yeah, because Logan has that mutation in those skin cells, she's not inheriting his germline. She's inheriting him as his somatic tissue. And so in that movie, all they had to do was just advance the science just a little further. Generate, artificial sperm from Logan's arm, fertilize mom. X-23 is essentially Logan, but without the I developed a random superpower.
So if I'm understanding this, it's like a section of his DNA was taken and implanted in a fetus?
No, the whole thing. But like your germline tissue for X-Men is you can pass on the ability to have mutation. You can pass on the ability to have powers, but not the power itself.
Gotcha. Yeah.
Right? But Logan passed on the power itself.
Okay. Yeah.
To X-23 because it didn't come from his germline.
Right.
It came from the tissue with the actual powers.
Okay.
The differentiated version of him. And I was just like, oh, that's fantastic. And so like this question.
Is this what you guys retconned, or do they come up with this in the film?
We retconned.
Nice. Okay. Good.
Yeah, right. And this was just, and it starts out with this dumb premise. It ends with students reading primary literature from Nature, going, oh, look how they did this. They've done all this. Right. And you're like going, yes, yes. And, they didn't really have much X-Men knowledge prior to that, but they had just watched the movie and were like, this is a difficult question. Well, let's do some research and find out.
Well, I greatly enjoyed talking to you. Where can people find you? It seems like the best way to absorb your knowledge is to become a student at Duke University. So, like, if anybody's listening and they're thinking about getting a biology degree, go that way.
I do tend to go to a few different sort of science fiction fantasy conventions a year. I know I'll be at DragonCon in Atlanta and Labor Day weekend.
I might be at that. I'm hoping to go to that this year.
You should.
I'm totally going to come up and fourth wheel you and Aaron McDonald and Muhammad Noor.
And Muhammad, yeah.
Yeah, and just be like, hey guys, and like I'll read a bunch of genetics before that to try and fit in.
No.
Or I'll constantly have my phone out and look at Wikipedia and be like, yeah, that's a good point, but also, and then bring up my thing.
They actually have a podcast track.
Really?
They do.
Well, Professor, enjoy the rest of your break. Have a good 2020. And it was a pleasure to talk to you. Thank you.
You too. Thanks for having me. Yeah. It was a great time.
Listeners, each week, myself and my friend Nick Sperduti and I go to some place to perform stand-up comedy or improv or some other amusing thing. And this week, we went to Oz, which... Did you think we were going to Australia? Because I thought we were going to Australia, Nick.
I actually wasn't quite sure. About halfway through, I thought, well, this is kind of different.
Yeah, well, because at first I was like, flying monkeys. Got it. Yeah, Australia. Yep. That seems right. Yeah, right. They've got all sorts of weird animals.
Thought as well. Yeah.
Like all their animals have pouches, so I was like, it doesn't surprise me to have a winged monkey.
I think all of their animals. I think like 2 of their animals have pouches.
I know they're hold on. They got kangaroos.
Marsupials.
They've got they've got kangaroos. They've got marsupials.
Wasn't that the same thing? Isn't a kangaroo a type of marsupial?
No, I think they're very different. A marsupial, I believe, is a horse with a pouch. So it's like a regular horse, except no, because all the mammals have pouches, and horses do too, and presumably cows, but apparently no flying monkeys. That's not, and that's like unique to Oz.
Okay, I'm gonna just let the pouch thing go.
All right,
so we can move past it. Someday
we'll do comedy in Australia, and I will be proven right.
Yeah,
but yeah, we went to Oz. Well, overall, pretty good time. We actually did several gigs while we were there, because when you're traveling, I mean, if you're able to do multiple comedy spots, I mean, you've already spent the money on the transportation, so it behooves you to do that. So we did it in the Munchkin Village, and we did it at
they prefer
the Emerald
Munchkin
City.
Land.
Is it Munchkin Land now? Okay.
Yeah, it's its own kind of thing. Oh, but yes, we did the Emerald City. To be fair, it's a lot bigger than I thought it would be.
Yeah, it was much bigger.
It's 4 large sections.
Uh-huh.
And they're named for their cardinal directions. Emerald City, I believe, is in the middle. But yeah, we started off in Emerald City, and I gotta say, a lot of green, really green.
I liked that. I thought Emerald City was really pretty. The thing I didn't like was I felt like they were needlessly provocative with their politics. I didn't care for that at all. We're foreigners. We're not a part of this. But we get off the hot air balloon. And like I'd say within 10 minutes somebody's like, so you for the North Witch or the West Witch?
Yeah, no, they were doing a census, but a political census, and they accosted us when I wasn't ready for it.
Accosted,
and they were like, hey, you guys are new here. Which witch are you into? And I said, which witch? And then me, I got tangled into a whole which. Then
you tried to defuse it with a sandwich joke, which was,
and I thought that hit. I felt really good about.
Well, the guy laughed, but then he got real serious and was like, "Seriously, though, which witch?"
Yeah, I'm glad I got him for a second. But then I said East, and then you said, "Can I write someone in?"
Right. Exactly. I don't see why I should have to pick between these two witches, particularly when we're using an ordinal system. That didn't even make because he's like, everybody knows there's just a West Witch and a North Witch, and I was like, but isn't it implicit? Like, doesn't that assume that there's a South Witch and an East Witch?
There are. I believe there's 4 witches.
Okay. Yeah.
I think that's part of the problem. You weren't really paying attention.
Right, but when I said I was going to go with the South Witch, actually I said I was going to go Southeast. I was like, I'm going to go with the Southeast Witch. Everyone just laughed at me, and they're like, go ahead and throw away your witch vote. And I was like,
and then you wrote in Gary Johnson.
I wrote in Gary Johnson.
They said, sir, that's not a witch. And you said, well, I stand by my choices.
I did. I did, and I do. I wrote in Gary Johnson as my favorite witch.
Yeah.
And exactly. I was like, I'm owning this. I am in favor of legalizing marijuana throughout Oz and releasing any Munchkins who have been incarcerated for nonviolent crimes pertaining to that marijuana. And also, I don't know what countries Oz is fighting right now, but I want them out.
Yeah. And I gotta be, they were impressed by your knowledge of Oz politics, despite the fact that you just stepped foot in there. And I think really you were just going, kind of going
I went
crazy.
Into autopilot, to be honest with you.
It felt like that, yeah.
Yeah, I was like,
I knew that. They didn't know that.
No, they were like, this guy knows a lot about non-interventionism. And I was like, yeah, but no, honestly, I could have pulled that anywhere.
Well, then, it did get a little bit odd between the two shows.
Oh, because of the deaths?
I don't want to say because it just kind of felt like it happened.
Right.
So we rented an SUV when we got there, and apparently
it was a Dodge Caravan, but still.
Oh well, yeah, sure. But what the point was, we hit a witch right away,
really quick. Like as we were leaving the airport, we hit a witch
and flattened.
Yeah, like it was very disturbing. Like we parked the van and like. Her legs
Feet
were poking
just sticking out.
Yeah, and everybody was like,
yeah.
Some people were openly celebrating, which I thought was in horrible taste. I thought that was very, very poor taste.
And I was just running in circles, and I kept going, is this the one I voted for? Was this the one I voted for? And here's the thing, like, we were trying to keep it quiet, but then all these people came around, and they were going, ding, dong, the witches. They had a whole song for this thing.
Yeah.
And I was going, what is happening right now? We just accidentally murdered someone, and I felt terrible.
Oh, I know. I like at the very, I was like, I feel awful that we killed somebody. I'm fairly confident this is going to affect my driver's license. If not,
I thought we were going to go to prison.
Oh,
Oz prison.
Because it's like, you think about it, like, it was my fault for going the wrong way in a roundabout. I mean, I should have known better. A lot of people don't know this, but they drive on the left side of the road in Oz, and I'm fine up until we hit that roundabout, and then my instincts kicked in, and I started going right and just collided with this lady, and oh man, yeah, and
I was terrified, genuinely terrified that we were going to end up in Oz.
Yeah, but no, but they were. Prison. Oh yeah, the prison. Yeah, yeah. A whole nother the third Oz. Yeah. But no, we did that, and then we killed that other witch, which wasn't our fault. That time wasn't our fault.
I mean, that was because I accidentally we were next to the witch, and I turned on the windshield wiper fluid.
Yeah.
And apparently she got wet, and she just like I guess melted.
She screamed that a lot.
Terms.
Yeah, she was very, very clear about that she was melting. And
I felt bad. Tarful was very upset.
Yeah. Our Wookiee companion was very disturbed by that.
Oh, yeah. We should mention we were with all 6 of our Wookiees, and Joe Blob came with.
Our Gungan. And our protocol, or your protocol droid.
Yeah.
AJ-19.
AJ-19, yeah. So we were with the whole group, and they all squeezed in.
Mm-hmm. We were driving that Dodge Veravan on that
caravan, yep.
that like yellow road. Which connects the Munchkin land to Oz. It's like a freeway.
They could pave it, It's like God.
Yeah, you would think.
What year is it?
Yeah, so we killed. Well, we got on that elevator, and the elevator just kind of dropped and flattened somebody, which turned out to be a witch.
Yeah, that was another witch.
It turned out to be the South Witch. It was very, but again, not a big. I'd say generally considered positive developments from the people in Oz.
Well, they just kept singing that same song, and I was like, does everybody know this song? It just felt like a national thing, and then we were known by that from then on as the Witch Killers.
Well, you were known as the Witch Killer. I was known as the comedian that wrote in Gary Johnson as my favorite witch.
Yeah. They were saying, "Here comes the Witch Killer," and the guy who wrote in Gary Johnson.
Yeah, it was. Yeah, but you know what? All the same, though, that third night, packed house. Absolutely packed house.
Oh, we killed. On accident, but also
in both senses. We did very well. I got to say, it was people in Oz are looking for a good time. It's seems to be an educated crowd. Likes to go out. Doesn't mind paying a little bit for drinks. It was good.
We did so well that we got invited to meet the wizard.
Yeah, he's like their mayor or their comptroller or something. In any event, he's some kind of high-ranking guy. I really liked that guy. He's an old friendly.
I know you did.
Oh yeah, he was just. I mean, he's an old friendly dude in a top hat and a waistcoat.
Right,
I immediately. Yeah, exactly. I was like, "Where did you get your waistcoat?" And he's like, "Oh, I got it at this store called Suit Supply." And I was like, "Really?" And we didn't have time to go there, but I'm going to go to their website because his fashion was just on spot on in my opinion.
Yeah, he was basically wearing what you were wearing, so yeah, I get it.
Yeah, pretty much. I do more or less dress like the Wizard of Oz, minus the top hat, which I own, but I only wear about once a year.
Yeah, on occasion.
Yeah, and as I get older, I'm going to be wearing that more.
We know. Everybody knows.
Yeah, but he was really nice because he booked us a hot air balloon at his expense back. Which was cool because we ruined the Dodge Caravan when we hit that witch, so we couldn't get back that way.
Well, I didn't know that she was going to get stuck up in. She was in the exhaust. It was really a mess.
It was
carburetor
horrible.
Was gone. It was.
Yeah. I'm very glad that I used. Fortunately, my credit card company is actually going to handle that. Which it's apparently not.
Well, I told you, always get the insurance.
You next time, absolutely. Like I was lucky that the insurance company is going to handle it. But he was also really nice to everybody in our retinue.
I mean, he was very generous, I'd say.
Yeah, So here's the scene. We've been traveling around Oz. We've been, trying not to hit these winged monkeys, which nobody talks about, but like monkeys fling poo, and also winged monkeys are terribly bad because they don't care where they're going to the bathroom. No one talks about that in terms of Oz.
Just reckless.
Yeah, very reckless. So we're dealing with a lot of those, but anyway, we've done our gigs in the Emerald City, and we're leaving, and the wizard comes out. My boy, you're a great man, and I like your sense of humor. And I was like, this guy talks fantastic.
Yeah.
And he was nice to us and everything. But then he gave all these like merit badges or like party favors or something to our Wookiees. And to the other things, like he walked up to AJ-19, your protocol droid, and he gave him this little felt heart that he'd cut out with scissors, and it really AJ, you could tell he just lit up. He felt so included.
He said something about it was in him the whole time.
Yeah.
It was really generous, and he said, here's the heart that you've always wanted, and Yeah, AJ-19. I've never seen him that emotional.
Yeah,
for a protocol droid, but he really took that on.
Yeah, he was. No, it was touching. It was absolutely touching. I was like, this is just what a generous host. And Tarful, I don't remember what he gave. He gave him like a crescent moon shape or something, but it was supposed to be for courage.
Right.
Which was nice. And then Wolfwaro, he gave brains to. Which at first I kind of felt bad about, because if
that felt rude almost.
Yeah, it felt rude, didn't it? But then
a little.
But what I didn't know, and I feel kind of like a bad friend that I didn't know this, but Wolfwaro had actually very severely dyslexic, but didn't know it until he was an adult. He's older, and it just wasn't diagnosed on Kashyyyk at that time, and so everybody thought he was stupid, but he's not. He's very intelligent.
That makes sense why his recipes always turn out like shit.
Oh yeah,
he can't cook for hell.
Yeah, because he's confusing all the ingredients.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, and Dr. Lungara, he gave him. Dr. Lungara Jr. He gave him contact lenses for foresight and hindsight, and he gave Chewbacca a spleen.
Yeah, it was a whole spleen. Yeah,
a spleen for imposter.
It wasn't like a patch of a spleen. It was in a bucket, or in a
jar.
chest. Yeah, it was in a jar inside of like a cooler with ice around it.
Yep.
It
was very strange. It was very bizarre. I don't. But the weirdest part of that, I thought, Nick, was he handed her a jar with a spleen in it inside of an ice chest and goes, "And for you, Chewbacca, here's a spleen." And she started crying and went, "For imposter syndrome?" And he went, "Of course." And then they hugged. Like, apparently spleens represent imposter syndrome. I had no idea, but that is a thing.
No, you and me both. I was very unaware. And also, the thing that surprised me the most about that is they let us take it back on the plane.
Yeah, agreed.
Because we had to take we took the hot air balloon, but then we eventually had to transfer to a plane. And I'm surprised they even let us take that back.
I am, too.
And also, what did Joe Blow...
Okay, well, the Joe Blow thing was weird. That was because he's, so far he's given a heart to AJ-19, and he's given all these body parts with various significances to the Wookiees, and then he just gives Joe Blow a handgun.
It was
just hands him a gun, and he doesn't even he just goes, "Here you go," and hands him a gun.
It was an old timey. It's not even like a modern day.
It's like, I think it's a flintlock pistol. I didn't get a good look at it.
Yeah. Well, no, but it was something along those lines. And he said, "Now, don't forget, you'll need gunpowder."
Yep. And I was waiting for the lesson of does this?
Nope.
What does this signify? Does this signify always calibrate what you're doing, or you've only got one shot? Maybe.
I could good.
Pull the trigger. Don't.
You know what? You would be a good Wizard of Oz.
Thank you. That is pretty much straight up what I plan to end up doing.
Of all people I know, I think you would make the best Wizard of Oz.
Thank you. I agree. First of all, I'm a baritone, which if you've seen Wicked, the Wizard of Oz is a baritone in that, and I can actually sing that song. I can't hit the high notes in the other songs, but I can sing like Defying Gravity. Phenomenal song.
Yeah.
Very difficult for me to sing that. However,
I prefer Oklahoma.
Sentimental Man, Oklahoma is also great. Sentimental Man, which is the song the Wizard does, I can hit that. And I think, given that my costuming and bizarre old-timey demeanor all intersect, I might well do that.
And you're also your ability to justify gifts.
That's true. You're right. Because again, I could do that with a handgun. I think I would have been like, Joe Blow, you're very indecisive. Remember to pull the trigger. Here's a handgun. He didn't do that, though. It was very...
Are you sure it didn't feel like maybe he was just running out of stuff? Because we did have a lot of people with us. There's a lot of things he had to give away, and eventually it felt like...
Completely honest with you, I thought he kind of ran out of stuff after the spleen. Well, I liked Oz a lot. I'm going to give it an 8. How about you?
Oh, wow. You know what? I also genuinely enjoyed it, and I would say a 7.4.
Good. All right. Okay, man. Well, good trip. All right. I'll see you next week.
Talk to you soon.
That's the show. We're smarter and we're closer. Thanks, Dr. Eric Spana, for coming on and sharing your wealth of genetic knowledge and nerd fandom with us. Thanks, Taylor Standridge, for audio engineering. And thanks, Nicholas Sperduti. for scoping out Oz with me. Until next week, tally-ho!